$3 billion. That is the exact price tag of a single ego trip. We always hear the saying, "The customer is always right," but in the high-altitude world of commercial aviation, the flight attendant holds the power of a dictator. Usually, that power goes unchecked. But on a freezing Tuesday in November, on board AeroVantage Flight 492, one senior flight attendant made a fatal calculation. She looked at a woman in a hoodie sitting in seat 2A and saw a problem. She saw someone who didn't belong. What she didn't see was the person who held the fate of the entire airline in her hands. This isn't just a story about a kicked passenger. This is the story of the most expensive mistake in aviation history. This is how Sarah Jenkins erased her company's biggest deal. The air inside the jet bridge at Chicago O'Hare felt less like a hallway and more like a refrigerator. It was November 14th, the kind of Tuesday that bites at your exposed skin and makes everyone just a little bit more aggressive than necessary. Outside, a mix of sleet and snow was beginning to coat the tarmac, threatening delays that AeroVantage Airlines could not afford. Inside the cabin of the Boeing 737, Max Sarah Jenkins stood at the galley, her smile plastered on like a decal. Sarah had been with AeroVantage for 18 years. She was the senior purser, the queen of the cabin, and she wore her golden wings like a sheriff's badge. She was tired. Her feet throbbed in her navy heels, and her patience had eroded 3 flights ago in Denver. To Sarah, the first-class cabin was her sanctuary, and she was its fierce guardian. She prided herself on keeping it exclusive. She watched the passengers board with a critical eye. A businessman in a charcoal suit? He belongs. An older couple with Louis Vuitton carry-ons? They belong. Then she saw Arlene. Dr. Arlene Boudreau stepped onto the plane, bringing a gust of cold air with her. She didn't look like the typical first-class passenger on the Chicago to New York red carpet route. She was a black woman in her early 40s, wearing an oversized slate-gray cashmere hoodie, black leggings, and run-down sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore zero makeup. She looked exhausted, hugging a battered leather messenger bag to her chest, as if it contained the crown jewels. Arlene was exhausted for a reason. She had just spent 72 hours straight in a data center in Silicon Valley, rewriting the back-end code for a merger that was supposed to save AeroVantage from bankruptcy. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the managing partner at Helix Capital, the private equity firm currently deciding whether to buy the struggling airline or let it die. But right now, she just wanted to sleep. She glanced at her boarding pass on her phone. 2A. As Arlene turned left into the first-class cabin, Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, her body physically blocking the aisle. It was a subtle move, one Sarah had perfected over a decade, a gentle physical barrier wrapped in a sickly sweet tone. "Excuse me, miss," Sarah said, her voice pitched high enough to cut through the ambient noise of the engines. "Economy boarding is actually down the second aisle, or you can pass through here, but please keep moving. We have a tight schedule." Arlene stopped, blinking slowly. Her brain was foggy from lack of sleep. "I know," she said, her voice soft and raspy. "I'm in 2A. Sarah didn't move. She didn't check the manifest. She just looked at the hoodie. She looked at the sneakers. Then she looked at Arlene's face. In Sarah's mind, the calculation was instant. Upgrade fraud, or a mistake. "Can I see your boarding pass, please?" Sarah asked, extending a hand, palm up. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Arlene sighed, shifting the heavy messenger bag. She held up her phone. The screen clearly displayed the AeroVantage logo, the name Boudreau, Arlene, and the bold designation, First Class, Seat 2A. Sarah stared at the screen for a beat too long. Instead of stepping aside and apologizing, a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. She had been wrong, and Sarah Jenkins hated being wrong. "Right," Sarah said, clipping the word. She stepped aside just enough to let Arlene squeeze past, but not enough to be polite. "Make sure your bag fits in the overhead. If it doesn't, we'll have to check it. The bins in first are reserved for standard luggage." Arlene didn't have the energy to fight the passive aggression. She just wanted the seat. "It'll fit," she mumbled, moving to row 2. The cabin was already filling up. In seat 2B sat a man named Gregory Holt. Gregory was a regular, a mid-level executive for a pharmaceutical chain who drank too much scotch on flights and liked to flirt with the attendants. He watched Arlene approach with a raised eyebrow. Arlene lifted her leather messenger bag. It was heavy, loaded with 2 laptops, 3 hard drives, and legal documents worth billions. She struggled for a brief second to hoist it into the bin. "Need some help with that?" Gregory asked, though he didn't move to assist. "I got it," Arlene grunted, sliding the bag in. It fit perfectly. As she sat down and buckled her belt, closing her eyes, she thought the interaction was over. She was wrong. Sarah Jenkins was in the galley, watching. The sleight of being shown the ticket still burned. She picked up the cabin phone to call the gate agent, but then hung up. She wanted to handle this herself. She walked down the aisle, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor. She stopped at row 2. "Mom," Sarah said. Arlene opened one eye. "Yes?" "I need you to move your bag." Arlene looked up, confused. "Excuse me?" "Your bag." Sarah pointed to the overhead bin Arlene had just closed. "It's taking up too much space. Mr. Holt here has a suit jacket he needs to lay flat, and your bag is crowding the bin. You'll need to put it under the seat in front of you." Arlene looked at the bin. It was huge. Her bag took up maybe a third of it. "There is plenty of room for a jacket," Arlene said, her voice calm but firm. "And that bag contains sensitive equipment. I'm not shoving it under the seat to be kicked." "It's a safety regulation," Sarah lied smoothly. "Heavy items must be stowed beneath the seat during takeoff if the overhead is at capacity. And it is at capacity." Arlene looked around. The bin opposite them was empty. "The bin across is empty. Put his jacket there." Sarah's smile vanished. Her authority was being questioned in front of the other first-class passengers. Gregory Holt was watching, amused. "Miss!" Sarah's voice dropped an octave, losing the customer service veneer. "I am not going to ask you again. Place the bag under the seat, or I will have to tag it and check it into the hold." "You are not checking this bag," Arlene said, sitting up straighter. The fog of sleep was clearing, replaced by the cold steeliness that made her a terrifying negotiator in the boardroom. "And I'm not putting it under the seat. I paid full fare for this seat, specifically for the space. I am following the rules." "You're being non-compliant," Sarah snapped. The buzzword, the magic word that gave flight crews distinct power since 9/11. "I am being reasonable," Arlene countered. "You are being petty. Now please, let me rest." Arlene put her noise-cancelling headphones on. It was a dismissal, a power move. Sarah Jenkins stood there, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. She wasn't just a flight attendant in that moment. She was the law, and she had just been ignored. She turned on her heel and marched to the front of the plane, grabbing the interphone to the cockpit. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "We have a situation in 2A. Passenger is refusing crew instructions and becoming aggressive. I don't feel safe flying with her." Captain Mark Reynolds was a man who just wanted to get home. He had a mortgage in the suburbs of Chicago, and a divorce that was bleeding him dry. When the interphone buzzed, he groaned. Sarah was a good purser, efficient, but Mark knew she had a temper. However, the cardinal rule of the sky was simple: back your crew. If the crew didn't feel safe, the plane didn't move. "How bad is it, Sarah?" Reynolds asked. "She's combative, Mark, refused to stow luggage properly, and when I gave her a direct order, she put headphones on and ignored me. She's disrupting the cabin." "Copy that," Reynolds sighed. "Do you want me to come back there?" "No," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing as she looked back at the top of Arlene's head. "I want her off. I'm not spending 3 hours in a metal tube with someone who thinks rules don't apply to them." "All right, call the gate supervisor. If she won't go, call the airport police." Sarah hung up the phone with a sense of grim satisfaction. She walked back to row 2. The plane was fully boarded now. The economy passengers were settled. The doors were about to close. She tapped Arlene on the shoulder, hard. Arlene pulled the headphones down around her neck. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Sarah said loudly. The entire first-class cabin went silent. Rows 1 through 4 were now an audience. "The captain has determined that you are a flight risk due to your failure to comply with crew instructions. You need to gather your things and exit the aircraft immediately." Arlene laughed. It was a short, dry sound of disbelief. "You're joking? Over a bag?" "It's not about the bag anymore, Mom. It's about your attitude and your refusal to follow Federal Aviation Safety instructions. Now get up." "I am Dr. Arlene Boudreau," Arlene said, her voice rising slightly, ensuring the people around her heard. "I am a calm, paying passenger. I have done nothing wrong. I am not moving." "I didn't ask who you were," Sarah sneered. "I told you to get off my plane." "Your plane?" Arlene unbuckled her seatbelt, but she didn't stand up. She turned her body toward the aisle. "Let me tell you something. I have a meeting in New York at 2:00 p.m. that is more important than you can possibly understand. If you remove me from this flight, you are going to set off a chain of events that you will regret for the rest of your life." "Is that a threat?" Sarah gasped. She looked at Gregory Holt. "Did you hear that? She just threatened me." Gregory, who was enjoying the drama, shrugged. "She said you'd regret it." "Sounds like a threat to me." Sarah turned back to Arlene, triumph in her eyes. "That's it. I'm calling the police." Arlene pulled out her phone. She didn't call the police. She didn't call a lawyer. She opened her messaging app and typed a quick message to a contact saved as Harrison Vance, CEO. "Problem on Flight 492. Being removed. A deal at risk. Handle it." She hit send. But as she watched the progress bar, the signal bars on her phone dropped to 0. The doors had just been closed. The plane was switching to internal power. The message sat there. Not delivered. Arlene felt a pit form in her stomach. She was cut off. 3 minutes later, the cockpit door didn't open, but the main cabin door did. 2 Chicago police officers, accompanied by a frantic-looking gate agent named Paul, boarded the plane. The cold air rushed in again. Sarah met them at the front. She spoke in hushed, urgent whispers, pointing at Arlene. The officers nodded. They looked bored. They dealt with unruly drunks and mask refusers all day. A quiet woman in a hoodie didn't look like a threat, but the flight crew's word was law. The officers walked down the aisle. The lead officer, a burly man with a mustache, stopped at row 2. "Ma'am," he said, his hand resting on his belt. "The pilot has requested your removal from the aircraft. You need to come with us." "Officer," Arlene said, keeping her hands visible, "this is a misunderstanding. The flight attendant is harassing me because of my appearance. I haven't raised my voice until now. Ask the other passengers." She looked around the cabin. "Did anyone see me do anything dangerous?" Silence. The wealthy passengers of first class looked away. They didn't want to get involved. They wanted to get to New York. Gregory Holt looked out the window, studying the wing de-icing. "Ma'am, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way," the officer said, pulling a pair of zip ties from his belt. "If you don't walk off voluntarily, you will be arrested for trespassing and interfering with a flight crew. That's a federal offense. You'll spend the night in jail." Arlene looked at the zip ties. She looked at Sarah Jenkins, who was standing at the front of the cabin, arms crossed, a smug smirk playing on her lips. Arlene took a deep breath. She thought about the deal. If she went to jail, the merger died. If she got off now, she might still be able to find a charter flight or drive. She had to protect the asset. She had to protect the timeline. "Fine," Arlene said. Her voice was ice cold. "I'll go." She stood up. She reached up and grabbed her heavy leather bag from the bin. She slung it over her shoulder. "Smart choice," the officer said. Arlene stepped into the aisle. She paused next to Sarah Jenkins. The flight attendant refused to make eye contact, looking past her toward the back of the plane. "You have the name, right?" Arlene asked Sarah, her voice low. "Excuse me?" Sarah glanced at her. "My name," Arlene said. "Dr. Arlene Boudreau. I want you to remember it, because tomorrow morning you're going to hear it again. And when you do, I want you to remember the moment you decided to do this." "Get off the plane, ma'am," Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Have a nice day." Arlene walked off the jet bridge. The heavy door of the aircraft swung shut behind her with a definitive thud. Inside the plane, Sarah Jenkins picked up the interphone. "Cabin secure, Captain. Problem resolved. We're ready for pushback." She felt a rush of adrenaline. She had won. She had protected her domain. She walked into the galley and started prepping the pre-flight drinks for the remaining first-class passengers. She popped a bottle of champagne. She had no idea that she had just sealed the fate of AeroVantage Airlines. Arlene stood in the terminal, the humiliation washing over her like a fever. People were staring. A woman escorted by police always draws stares. "We need to see your ID, ma'am," the officer said, once they were back in the main concourse, "and we're going to need to file a report." "Here." Arlene handed him her driver's license. Then she handed him a second card. It was black, made of titanium. It wasn't a credit card. It was a global entry diplomatic clearance card, usually reserved for high-level government officials and top-tier corporate liaisons. The officer looked at the card, then back at Arlene. His posture changed instantly. He straightened up. "Dr. Boudreau," he said, handing the cards back. I didn't realize." "You were doing your job, officer," Arlene said, pulling her phone out. The signal was back. But the woman on that plane was not doing hers. She looked at her phone. The text to Harrison Vance had failed. She tapped it and hit retry. Sent. She didn't stop there. She dialed a number from her favorites. It rang once. "Arlene? You land early." The voice on the other end was deep and gravelly. It was Marcus Sterling, the chairman of the board for AeroVantage. He was the man currently fighting a hostile takeover, the man praying Arlene's firm would inject the capital needed to save them. "No, Marcus," Arlene said, walking toward the exclusive AeroVantage lounge, the officers trailing behind her awkwardly, unsure if they should detain her or salute her. "I didn't land. I didn't even take off." "What? Why? The weather?" "No, I was kicked off Flight 492 by your senior purser, Sarah Jenkins." There was a silence on the line, so profound it felt like the call had dropped. She did what?" Marcus whispered. "She didn't like my hoodie, Marcus. She didn't like that I wouldn't check the bag containing the signed acquisition papers. She had the police escort me off the plane like a criminal." Arlene stopped in the middle of the concourse. "I'm standing at gate C4. The plane is pushing back right now." "I will turn that plane around," Marcus roared. "I will call the tower right now. I will have the FAA ground it." "No," Arlene said. A plan was forming in her mind, a way to not just fix this, but to ensure the culture that allowed Sarah Jenkins to exist was burned to the ground. "Let them fly. Let Sarah have her flight. I'll catch the next one, or I'll charter. Arlene, I am so sorry. I can't believe this. I'll fire her. I'll fire the pilot. I'll fire everyone." "Not yet," Arlene said. "I want you to set up a meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., the full board. And I want the crew of Flight 492 summoned to headquarters for a debrief immediately upon their return flight." "You want the crew there?" "Yes," Arlene said, watching the plane through the glass windows as it taxied toward the runway. "I want Sarah Jenkins in the room when I sign the deal, or when I decide not to." "Arlene, please," Marcus sounded desperate. "Don't let this kill the merger. Thousands of jobs." "That depends on tomorrow, Marcus," Arlene said. "Get me a charter. I'm coming to New York. And Marcus?" "Yes?" "Make sure Sarah Jenkins knows she's being summoned to meet the CEO. But don't tell her why. Let her think she's being commended. Let her think she's a hero." Arlene hung up. She watched Flight 492 disappear into the grey clouds. On board, Sarah Jenkins was pouring champagne for Gregory Holt. "To a quiet cabin," Gregory toasted, raising his glass. "To following the rules," Sarah smiled, clinking her glass against his. The champagne tasted sweet. It was the last sweet thing she would taste for a very long time. The atmosphere inside Aerovantage Flight 492 had settled into a low, hypnotic hum. At 36,000 feet, the world below was nothing but a quilt of white clouds and grey winter sky, detached and abstract. For Sarah Jenkins, this was the only world that mattered. She moved through the first-class cabin with the practiced grace of a dancer. She collected empty ramekins of warmed nuts, refilled crystal tumblers with sparkling water, and adjusted window shades. To an outsider, she was the picture of service excellence. But internally, Sarah was vibrating with a toxic mix of adrenaline and self-righteousness. She retreated to the forward galley, drawing the heavy curtain that separated the premium passengers from the common cabin. It was her backstage area, her private court. Emily, a junior flight attendant, only 6 months into the job, was leaning against the counter, scrolling through a digital manual on her crew tablet. Emily had brown hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and eyes that darted nervously toward Sarah every few seconds. She had seen what happened at the gate. She had felt the wrongness of it in her gut, the way the woman in seat 2A had been dismissed not for her behavior, but for her presence. But Emily was 23, on probation, and terrified of Sarah. "You see how quiet it is out there?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed but intense. She was organizing the miniature liquor bottles, lining them up like soldiers. Emily looked up, hesitating. "Yes, Sarah. It's quiet." "That's because we maintained standards," Sarah said, picking up a bottle of gin and polishing the cap with a napkin. "That woman, she was a disruptor. You can smell them, Emily. If you do this job as long as I have, you develop a sixth sense. They come on board with a chip on their shoulder, testing boundaries. If I hadn't drawn the line at the bag, it would have been something else. She would have demanded a different meal, or played music without headphones, or harassed the other passengers. Sarah was rewriting history in real time, cementing a narrative that justified her cruelty. She needed to believe it. She seemed really calm, though, Emily ventured, her voice barely a whisper. "She said she had a meeting." Sarah whipped her head around, her eyes flashing. "Everyone has a meeting, Emily. The man in 3B has a meeting. I have a yoga class I'm missing tomorrow. That doesn't give anyone the right to disobey a federal safety order. Sarah moved closer to the junior attendant, her tone turning instructive, almost maternal, but with a hard edge. Listen to me. We are the last line of defense. The gate agents, they don't care. TSA, they're useless. Once those doors close, we are the law. If you let someone like that walk all over you, you lose the cabin. And once you lose the cabin, you're just a waitress in the sky. Are you a waitress, Emily? No, Sarah? Good. Then learn from this. I protected the experience of our high-value customers. Mr. Holt thanked me. Did you hear that? He thanked me. Sarah turned back to her work, satisfied. She poured herself a cup of black coffee and took a sip, looking at her reflection in the stainless steel of the coffee maker. She saw a hero. She saw a woman who held the line. She had no idea that 400 miles below her, the ground was shifting. The war room on the ground. While Sarah Jenkins was polishing gin bottles, Marcus Sterling was pacing the floor of his corner office in downtown Manhattan. The view from the 40th floor usually gave him a sense of power, the sprawling grid of New York City, the empire of commerce. Today, it felt like a cage. Marcus was a big man, a former linebacker who had pivoted to corporate law and then aviation. He was used to bulldozing through problems, but this problem couldn't be tackled. He held his phone to his ear, his knuckles white. I don't care what the manifest says. Get me the contact info for the lead purser on 492 right now. Marcus barked into the receiver. And get HR on the line. I want her file on my desk in 5 minutes. Not digital. I want the paper file. He slammed the phone down onto the mahogany desk. Sitting on the leather sofa across the room was Harrison Vance, the CEO of AeroVantage. Harrison was the opposite of Marcus, slender, silver-haired, a man of numbers and spreadsheets. He looked pale. She's not answering my texts anymore, Marcus, Harrison said, staring at his iPhone. Arlene, she's gone dark. She's on a charter, Marcus growled. She's probably flying comms dark just to make us sweat. And it's working. Harrison loosened his tie. Do you realize what happens if Helix Capital pulls out? We don't just miss a quarter. We miss payroll. The 787 order gets cancelled. The stock goes to pennies. We are looking at Chapter 11 by Christmas. I know the numbers, Harrison, Marcus snapped. He walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. We spent 6 months courting Arlene Boudreau. 6 months proving to her that we weren't a dinosaur legacy carrier, that we were modern, inclusive, efficient. We invited her to the gala. We sent her the hampers. We practically begged her to save us. Marcus turned around, his eyes wild. And in 5 minutes, one flight attendant with a superiority complex undid it all. She kicked the literal savior of this company off the plane because she was wearing a hoodie. It's the optics, Marcus, Harrison whispered. If this gets out, black female executive kicked off flight for looking poor. The media will eat us alive. The stock won't just drop, it will be delisted. We'll be radioactive. The intercom on Marcus's desk buzzed. Sir? The assistant's voice trembled. I have the file on Sarah Jenkins, and I have an update on Dr. Boudreau's movements. Bring it in, Marcus ordered. The assistant, a young man named David, hurried in. He placed a thick manila folder on the desk. Sarah Jenkins, 18 years of service, multiple commendations for punctuality and grooming, but... David hesitated. But what? Marcus ripped the file open. There are 3 prior complaints in the last 5 years, David said. All similar. Tone policing. Aggressive enforcement of minor rules. Condescending behavior. But they were all closed by middle management as unsubstantiated, or he said, she said. They swept it under the rug, Marcus muttered, scanning the pages. And now we tripped over the lump. And Dr. Boudreau? Harrison asked, leaning forward. She landed at Teterboro on a private Gulf Stream 20 minutes ago, David said. She took a car directly to the Helix Capital offices. She's calling a partner meeting. Harrison put his head in his hands. She's killing the deal. She's getting the other partners to vote no. Not yet, Marcus said. A cold resolve settled over him. If she wanted to kill the deal, she would have emailed us a termination notice. She's going to the office to draft terms. She's preparing for war. Marcus looked at the clock. It was 4:30 p.m. Flight 492 would be landing at JFK in 40 minutes. David, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. Send a message to the crew of Flight 492. Do it through ACRs, so they get it in the cockpit before they even open the doors. What should it say, sir? Ordering the entire flight crew, pilots and attendants, to report to the headquarters boardroom at 0900 hours tomorrow. Tell them it is a mandatory executive debrief regarding operational excellence. Operational excellence? Harrison looked up, confused. Why lie? Because, Marcus said, closing the file on Sarah Jenkins. I want Sarah to walk into that room thinking she's the queen of the world. I want her guard down. I want her to look Arlene Boudreau in the eye and realize exactly how small she really is. The arrival, the landing at JFK was smooth, a testament to the skill of Captain Reynolds. As the Boeing 737 taxied toward Terminal 4, the familiar chime signaled that it was safe to use cellular devices. In the galley, Sarah Jenkins pulled her phone from her purse. She expected texts from her husband, maybe a notification from her yoga studio. Instead, she saw a priority notification from the crew scheduling system. A red banner. Urgent. Crew directive. She tapped it, her heart skipping a beat. Was it a schedule change? A cancellation? To crew of Flight 492. From Office of the CEO, subject. Mandatory executive debrief. All crew members are ordered to report to Aerovantage World Headquarters, Boardroom A, at 0900 hours tomorrow, Novi 15. Topic: Review of in-flight protocols and operational excellence. Attendance is mandatory. Transportation will be provided. Sarah stared at the screen. She read it twice. Operational excellence, she whispered. A smile, slow and genuine, spread across her face. She looked at Emily, who was also reading the message on her phone with a look of dread. Emily, look. Sarah shoved her phone toward the younger girl. The CEO's office. Do you know how rare this is? I don't know, Emily stammered. Is this bad? Bad? Emily, read the subject line. Operational excellence. Sarah laughed, a sound of pure relief. They must have flagged the report I filed. They saw how we handled the situation with that woman. They want to use us as an example. You think they want to praise us? Emily asked, skeptical. Of course they do, Sarah said, checking her reflection in the mirror one last time, smoothing a stray hair. The company is going through a tough time. They need heroes. They need people who stick to the rules and protect the brand. We showed leadership today. Sarah grabbed her suitcase. The cabin door opened. The cold New York air rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and exhaust. To Sarah, it smelled like victory. She walked off the plane with her head held high, nodding to the captain. Did you see the message, Mark? She asked the pilot. Captain Reynolds looked less enthusiastic. He was rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, I saw it. Headquarters, 9 a.m. Seems heavy, Sarah. It's recognition, Mark, she assured him. Don't be so cynical. We did the right thing. As they walked through the terminal, Sarah Jenkins floated. She began mentally planning her outfit for the meeting. She wouldn't wear her uniform. No, she would wear her best suit. navy blue, sharp lapels, pearls. She wanted to look executive. She wanted to look like she belonged in that boardroom. She had no idea that she was dressing for her own execution. The Night Watch. That night, New York City was a kaleidoscope of lights, but inside the penthouse apartment of Dr. Arlene Boudreau on the Upper West Side, the lights were dim. Arlene sat at her glass dining table. The heavy leather messenger bag, the one that had caused so much trouble, sat open on the chair next to her. Spread out on the table were the acquisition documents for Aerovantage Airlines. It was a stack of paper 3 inches thick, pages and pages of financial audits, fleet assessments, debt restructuring plans, and union agreements. And right on top, the signature page. It was currently blank. Arlene held a fountain pen in her hand, twisting it between her fingers. She was wearing a silk robe now, having scrubbed the grime of travel from her skin, but she couldn't scrub away the memory of the humiliation, the way the passengers had looked at her, the way the police officer had reached for his zip ties, the way Sarah Jenkins had looked at her shoes and judged her worth. She picked up her phone. She had missed calls from Marcus Sterling, voicemails, texts pleading for a conversation. She ignored them all. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park. She looked at her reflection in the glass. She didn't see a victim. She saw a decision-maker. Arlene thought about the thousands of employees at Aerovantage, the baggage handlers, the mechanics, the gate agents, the junior flight attendants, like the young girl who had looked so scared today. If she killed the deal, they all lost their livelihoods. Innocents would suffer because of one woman's prejudice. But if she signed the deal without change, she was endorsing a culture that allowed people like Sarah Jenkins to thrive. Arlene turned back to the table. She picked up the pen. She didn't sign the document. Instead, she pulled out a fresh legal pad. She began to write a new addendum to the contract, a clause that she would present tomorrow. It was a clause that had nothing to do with fuel prices or debt ratios. It was a clause about personnel. She wrote furiously for an hour. When she was done, she ripped the page off the pad and placed it on top of the stack. She finally picked up her phone and sent a single text message to Marcus Sterling. "I'll be there at 9, Toll. Have the papers ready, and make sure she is sitting in the front row." Arlene turned off the lights. She needed to sleep. Tomorrow, she wasn't just a passenger in seat 2A. Tomorrow, she was the owner of the plane. The morning sun hit the glass facade of Aerovantage World Headquarters, turning the building into a shimmering monolith of corporate power. It was 8:45 a.m. Sarah Jenkins stepped out of the black town car the airline had sent for the crew. She smoothed the skirt of her navy blue suit, her own, not the uniform. She had chosen it carefully. It was tailored, sharp, and commanded respect. She wore a silk scarf, knotted at her throat, and pearl earrings that caught the light. She took a deep breath of the crisp November air. It tasted different here than at the airport. It tasted like money. Standing on the sidewalk, looking nervous and out of place, were the other members of Flight 492's crew. Emily, the junior flight attendant, was wringing her hands, wearing her uniform because she didn't own a suit appropriate for this. Captain Mark Reynolds was smoking a cigarette with quick, jerky motions, pacing near a concrete planter. "Good morning, team," Sarah said, her voice bright and projecting. She walked up to them like a general reviewing the troops. "Sarah," Captain Reynolds exhaled smoke, dropping the butt and grinding it out with his shoe. "You're chipper. Did you sleep at all? I was up half the night staring at the ceiling." "Mark, relax," Sarah chided, adjusting his tie. It was crooked. "I told you, this is about standards. Management is under pressure. They need to know who they can rely on. Yesterday we proved that we don't bend the rules for entitled passengers. That makes us an asset." "I don't know," Emily whispered, hugging her arms. The email said mandatory. It felt cold. "Corporate is always cold, honey. That's how they stay rich," Sarah winked. "Come on, let's go get our commendations." She led the way through the revolving doors. The lobby of Aerovantage HQ was a cavernous atrium of marble and steel. Usually it was buzzing with activity. Today it felt hushed. As Sarah approached the reception desk, the security guard, a man she had waved to for years, didn't smile back. He looked down at a list, checked off their names, and handed them temporary badges. "Visitor. Escort required." "Visitor?" Sarah laughed lightly. "Jerry, I've worked here for 18 years. I have my crew ID." "Instructions from the 40th floor, Ms. Jenkins," Jerry said, not meeting her eyes. "You need to wear the visitor badge." Sarah felt a tiny prick of irritation, but she brushed it off. Bureaucracy, she thought. Probably a security audit. They were escorted to the elevator by a silent intern. The ride to the 40th floor took a long time. Sarah checked her reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator car. She looked perfect. She practiced her humble yet capable smile. The doors opened. The executive floor was plush carpet and silent hallways. They were led down a long corridor, lined with models of airplanes, the history of the company. At the end of the hall stood the double mahogany doors of Boardroom A. The intern opened the doors. The room was freezing. That was the first thing Sarah noticed. The climate control was set to a temperature that kept you awake. Inside, the long oval table seemed to stretch for miles. Seated on the left side were the heavy hitters: Marcus Sterling, the chairman; Harrison Vance, the CEO; the VP of Human Resources, a woman named Linda, who was known as the Grim Reaper; and 3 other board members Sarah didn't recognize, men in grey suits who looked like they were carved out of granite. They weren't smiling. "Please," Harrison Vance said, gesturing to the empty chairs on the right side of the table. "Sit down." Sarah walked in, her heels sinking into the thick carpet. She took the seat directly across from the CEO. Captain Reynolds sat next to her, and Emily took the chair at the far end, looking like she wanted to disappear. "Good morning, Mr. Vance, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, projecting her voice. She folded her hands on the table. "We're here as requested, ready to discuss the operational protocols on Flight 492. Harrison Vance didn't answer. He was looking at a file in front of him. He looked aged, as if he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red-rimmed. "We are waiting for one more attendee," Marcus Sterling said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. He was staring at Sarah with a look she couldn't quite place. Was it anger, or was it pity? "Oh?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Is it the union rep? Because I really don't think—" "Quiet," Marcus said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Sarah's mouth snapped shut. The silence in the room grew heavy, pressing against her eardrums. The air conditioning hummed. A pitcher of ice water sweated on the table. Then the doors behind them opened again. Click, click, click. The sound of footsteps was different. These weren't the scuffed rubber soles of an intern. These were the sharp, authoritative strikes of high-end stilettos. Sarah turned in her chair to look. A woman walked into the room. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that cost more than Sarah's car. Her hair was blown out in a sleek, professional style. She carried a slim leather portfolio. She radiated an aura of absolute, terrifying control. She walked past Sarah without looking at her. She walked to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the person in charge. She sat down. She placed the portfolio on the table. She adjusted her glasses. Then she looked up. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her stomach dropped through the floor. The room started to spin. It was the eyes. She recognized the eyes. It was the woman from 2A. But it wasn't the woman in the hoodie. The exhaustion was gone. The messiness was gone. In her place sat a titan of industry. "Good morning, gentlemen," Arlene Boudreau said. Her voice was smooth, rich, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Good morning, Dr. Boudreau," the CEO said. He sounded subservient. He sounded scared. Sarah couldn't breathe. Her hand started to tremble on the mahogany table. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Arlene slowly turned her head. She locked eyes with Sarah. There was no anger in Arlene's face. There was something worse. Recognition. "I believe," Arlene said softly, "we have already met." The silence that followed was violent. It screamed through the room. Sarah Jenkins wanted to run. She wanted to stand up, apologize, claim insanity, claim anything. But she was frozen. Her carefully constructed reality, where she was the hero of the skies, had just shattered. "You," Sarah croaked. Her voice was a pathetic whisper compared to the confident tone she had used minutes ago. "You're the passenger." "I am the managing partner of Helix Capital," Arlene corrected her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "And until yesterday afternoon, I was the person holding the pen on the $3 billion acquisition that would have saved this airline from bankruptcy." Sarah looked at Harrison Vance. The CEO was staring at the table, unable to meet her gaze. "Saved?" Sarah asked, her mind racing to catch up. "What do you mean? Would have?" Arlene opened her portfolio. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Yesterday, Ms. Jenkins, I boarded your aircraft after working 72 hours straight to finalize the due diligence on your company. I was tired. I was dressed for comfort, not for a board meeting. And because of that, you decided I didn't belong." "It was a safety issue," Sarah blurted out. The lie came automatically, a desperate reflex. "The bag was too large. You were non-compliant. I have a responsibility to the safety of the flight." "Stop!" Marcus Sterling slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked like a whip. "Do not lie in this room, Sarah. We have the logs. We have the statements from the other passengers. Mr. Holt in 2B sent an email this morning stating you were harassing the woman before she even sat down." Sarah flinched. Gregory Holt? The man she had poured champagne for? He had turned on her? Arlene held up a hand to silence Marcus. She wanted to handle this. "You looked at me," Arlene said, leaning forward, her eyes boring into Sarah's soul. "And you saw a stereotype. You didn't check the manifest to see I was a global services VIP. You didn't check to see I was the guest of your CEO. You saw a black woman in a hoodie, and you decided to exert your power." Arlene paused, letting the words hang in the freezing air. "Do you know what was in that bag, Sarah?" Sarah shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "No." "The contracts," Arlene said. "The signed agreements to fund the pension plans for 12,000 employees. The liquidity injection to keep your planes flying next month. The future of everyone in this building." Arlene slid the paper across the table toward the CEO. "This is the termination notice," Arlene announced. The room gasped. Captain Reynolds looked like he was going to be sick. "Helix Capital is formally withdrawing our offer to acquire AeroVantage Airlines," Arlene stated. Her voice was flat, businesslike, lethal. "We do not invest in companies with systemic cultural rot. And if the senior purser, the leader of your cabin crew, feels comfortable profiling and ejecting a board-level investor over a piece of luggage, then the rot here is too deep for us to fix. Dr. Boudreau, please," Harrison Vance begged, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. We will terminate Ms. Jenkins immediately. We will retrain the entire staff. Please don't walk away. The deal is erased," Arlene said. "It's gone. You had a valuation of $3 billion yesterday. Today, without our backing, the market will value you at scrap prices." Sarah started to cry. It wasn't a noble cry. It was a sobbing, hyperventilating panic. She realized what was happening. She wasn't just losing her job. She was destroying the company. "I didn't know," Sarah sobbed. "I didn't know who you were. If you had told me." "That," Arlene cut her off, her voice suddenly sharp as a razor, "is exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with basic human dignity. You shouldn't need to know I'm a billionaire to not kick me off a plane for existing." Arlene stood up. She walked around the table. She stopped right behind Sarah's chair. Sarah could smell Arlene's perfume, something subtle and expensive, sandalwood and jasmine. It was the scent of the woman she had humiliated. "You wanted to be powerful, Sarah," Arlene whispered near her ear. "You wanted to be the queen of the cabin. Well, congratulations. You are now the most powerful person in the history of this airline. You single-handedly destroyed it." Arlene walked back to her seat, but didn't sit down. She looked at the board. "However," Arlene said, a new glint in her eye, "I am a businesswoman. I see value in assets, even distressed ones. I am willing to offer a new deal." Harrison Vance looked up, hope desperate in his eyes. "Anything. Name your terms." "The valuation is cut in half," Arlene said. $1.5 billion. That means all of you." She pointed to the board. "Lose your stock options. You get nothing. The shareholders take a massive hit." The board members groaned. It was a bloodbath. "And," Arlene continued, looking at Captain Reynolds and Emily, "the crew keeps their jobs. The pension remains funded. I won't let the mechanics and the junior attendants starve because of her." She pointed a manicured finger at Sarah. "But there is one condition, a non-negotiable condition." "What is it?" Marcus asked. "Her," Arlene said, keeping her finger pointed at Sarah. "She doesn't just get fired. I want her blacklisted. I want it stipulated in the contract that she is ineligible for rehire by AeroVantage or any of its subsidiaries or partners for life. And I want her to personally apologize to the staff members whose bonuses she just cut in half." Arlene looked at Sarah. "You have a choice, board. You can keep Sarah Jenkins and go bankrupt next week, or you can fire her, accept the lower deal and save the company. Decide now." It wasn't a choice. It was an execution. Harrison Vance didn't even look at his lawyers. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were hard. "Ms. Jenkins," the CEO said, his voice cold, "hand over your badge." Sarah shook her head. "No, please. I have 18 years. "Give me the badge," Harrison shouted, his patience snapping. Trembling, Sarah unpinned the visitor badge. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her crew ID, the one with the golden wings. She placed it on the mahogany table. It made a small plastic clack sound. The sound of a career ending. The sound of a life imploding. "Get her out of here," Marcus Sterling ordered. Security guards, not the friendly ones from the lobby, but burly men in suits, stepped forward. They grabbed Sarah by the arms. As she was dragged toward the door, Sarah looked back. She saw Arlene Boudreau standing at the head of the table, signing the new, lower-value contract. Arlene didn't look up. She had already moved on. Sarah was no longer an obstacle. She was just a memory. "Wait!" Sarah screamed as the doors opened. "I was just following the rules. I was just—" The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off her scream. Inside the boardroom, the silence returned. Arlene capped her pen. She looked at the shaken captain and the terrified junior flight attendant. "Captain," Arlene said gently, "you fly back to Chicago at noon?" "Yes, ma'am," Captain Reynolds squeaked. "Good. Make sure Emily here gets the lead position in the cabin. She has good instincts. She knew it was wrong." Arlene smiled at the young girl. "Don't let the Sarahs of the world teach you how to treat people, Emily." "I won't," Emily whispered. Arlene picked up her portfolio. She had erased $3 billion of wealth, slashed the board's profit, and fired a tyrant, all before 10 a.m. She walked out of the room, ready to get back to work. 6 months later, the winter snow was falling on Chicago O'Hare again. The cold was exactly the same as it had been on that fateful Tuesday in November. But everything else in Sarah Jenkins's life had turned to ash. She stood behind the counter of Budget Ride, an off-site rental car agency located 3 miles from the main terminal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering with an irritating hum. Sarah was wearing a polyester polo shirt that was 2 sizes too big, a stark contrast to the tailored navy suit she had worn to the boardroom. "I said I need a compact, not a subcompact," a customer yelled in her face, slamming his fist on the counter. He was a businessman in a cheap suit, red-faced and late. "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah said, her voice tired and devoid of its old haughty spark. "That is all we have available." "This is ridiculous," the man spat. "You people are incompetent." Sarah swallowed the insult. She had to. She had applied to Delta, United, American, even the budget carriers like Spirit. The answer was always the same. The moment they ran her background check, the application stopped. The Boudreaux clause, as it was quietly known in the industry, was real. She wasn't just fired, she was radioactive. The story of the flight attendant who cost her airline $1.5 billion had circulated through every HR department in the aviation world. She would never fly again. During her break, Sarah walked outside to the smoking area. The wind cut through her thin jacket. She looked up. Roaring overhead, banking sharply into the grey clouds, was an AeroVantage Boeing 737 MAX. It gleamed in the dim light, the logo freshly painted. As she watched the plane climb, a shuttle bus from the airport pulled up to the curb to drop off rental customers. The doors hissed open. Stepping off the bus, struggling with a heavy bag, was a flight attendant. It was Emily. But Emily looked different. She stood taller. She was wearing the navy blazer with the gold stripes on the sleeve, the uniform of the senior purser, the position that had once been Sarah's. Sarah froze, shrinking back into the shadows of the building. She didn't want to be seen. She watched as Emily efficiently directed a confused family toward the correct bus, smiling warmly, handling the situation with grace. Emily was living the life Sarah had thrown away over a hoodie. Sarah looked down at the trash can next to her. Stuffed inside, wrinkly and stained with coffee, was a copy of Forbes magazine that a customer had discarded. Sarah saw the cover. It was Dr. Arlene Boudreaux. She was standing on the tarmac, arms crossed, looking powerful and visionary. The headline read, "The Turnaround Queen, How Arlene Boudreaux Saved AeroVantage and Changed Corporate Culture Forever." Sarah stared at the face of the woman she had dismissed, the woman she had judged, the woman who had given her a chance to just be kind, a chance she had rejected. "Hey, you!" her manager shouted from the doorway. "Break's over. The line is out the door. Get back in here." Sarah Jenkins took one last look at the plane, disappearing into the clouds, a world she was now banned from forever. "Coming," she whispered. She stomped her cigarette out in the snow and walked back inside to serve the angry customers, grounded for life. In the end, Sarah Jenkins paid a price far higher than the cost of a first-class ticket. She paid with her career, her reputation, and her future. This story is a brutal reminder that you never truly know who you are talking to. We live in a world where we are quick to judge based on appearance, on clothes, on what we think success looks like. But as Arlene Boudreau proved, true power doesn't need to shout, and it doesn't always wear a suit. Sarah made a $1.5 billion mistake because she let her ego fly the plane instead of her humanity. Don't make the same mistake. Treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO, because you never know when the roles might reverse. What would you have done if you were in Arlene's shoes? Would you have fired Sarah or given her a second chance? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude drama and heavy karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Fly safe and be kind. I'll see you in the next one.